I got this message from Mitza Original that says, when are you going to cover Inyenyezi? She is on YouTube. Okay, let's cover it right now and see what we get. Warning, I'm probably not going to agree with everything she says, but I have respect for this channel and I think that her methodology is sound to some degree.
This video focuses on the Southern Bantu, but we are related to the Great Lakes Bantu who are or were, well, what is left of them, our Vamatata, our Mama Vapati, which means our ancestors' older siblings. To understand the Bantu, it is important to understand the origin and correct meaning of the expression. Bantu is not a word, nor is it a plural of a word. It does not mean many people like the derived Bantu language speakers would often define it. These derived speakers are the Western Niger-Congo ethnic groups who adopted and spoke derived Bantu languages as they moved eastward into Bantu territory, often seeking refuge or raiding. These groups brought with them the key prefix and introduced it to the Swahili language and adaptations of their own languages.
So what she's talking about here is the Bantu migration or the Bantu migration, and you will see here that she is disagreeing with the commenter who said the Proto-Bantu were always in East Africa. There was no migration. Do I agree with the Bantu migration that its heartland was that far west? No, I do not. I know for a fact that there were people in the Congo and Chad regions who were Proto-Bantu. So it has nothing to do with whether or not the Bantu migration didn't happen, but a lot of people still stay with pretty old ideas, even though we have genetics that show that the Bantu have moved for a long time. So let's address something else that she said, which is she said that the word Bantu is not a plural. Well, maybe not, but if we look at the origin of where this word comes from, it comes from the plural in Zulu for the word people, which is Abantu, and the singular is Umdu. So the word Bantu is definitely a plural. Now, I don't want you to get too hung up on this word because this word, even though it means people, comes from an ancestral tie to a person named Du, probably because we see it within the entire Bantu migration, which is why it's called the Bantu migration. You go to other places in Africa, they're called the Watu. You go to other places, they're called the any derivation with the word tu in it, which makes the people believe, based on how the African languages work or the Bantu languages work, that this is in reference to some kind of ancestor. Now, it's possible that it was just a translation of the word people since the beginning, but again, like I said, if you look at the words like Zulu, if you look at the words like Ilangen, if you look at the words like Mswati or whatever you want, the name of a people usually derives from an ancestor.
The key prefix isn't a Proto-Bantu language prefix, but a Kikongo-Niger Delta prefix. The Bantu do not make use of the key prefix as a paramount prefix. The prominent use of the key prefix as a paramount or high prefix shows that whoever brought it in usurped the Proto-Bantu because the paramount Bantu prefixes are si, ga, ha, mu, and na, not given in order of importance here, but they are ranked and assigned accordingly by the Bantu. For example, the si prefix, as will be shown later in this video, is assigned to the Medjay, the bull or cowhorns, who are the defense forces of the Bantu. Many ethnic groups in Africa have dominant prefixes or sounds, and the key sound isn't a Bantu language prefix. It is a foreign sound to the Bantu.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what she's talking about. The prefixes, suffixes, and infixes, which the Bantu language is built upon, the entire language is just prefixes, suffixes, and infixes, are essential to the language, and most of the ones that she listed are very common in Bantu languages the world over. So I don't actually agree, and I don't know. maybe I'm just not understanding what she's saying. Now, since she said that the Magi, which represents the bullhorn, which I showed you there was a group in Egypt called the Magi, but I don't know any other Magi in Africa outside of the Magi. And that name, Magi, is a name that was not given to themselves. That's a foreign name given to them by the ancient Egyptians. And those people, the Magi, are 100% Nilotic. They're not Bantu at all. Even if you think the ancient Egyptians are Bantu, the Magi were not Bantu. They were Nilotic. And their language is completely different than the Bantu languages.
Just like the Ova, which is a paramount prefix used by the Ovimbundu people, is a foreign sound to the Bantu people. The Kikongo, Niger, Ngolo, Cameroon, and Shona ethnic groups were attributed as the core Bantu because they were found speaking derived Bantu languages by the 1500s. At this time, their kingdoms were in control of large swaths of Bantu territory. But this assumption was derived from a cross-section in African history, which is a single moment in time that was taken out of context and lacked retrospect.
First of all, let's read what is written on the screen. These natives imagine them to be the work of demons, being unable to conceive how these structures could be raised. The north of the Ville Royal do Monomatapa, which is situated on ancient Portuguese maps as being in the northern division of the Mashona country on the south side of Zambezi under the name Monomatapa, in the Abatu and Bangai regions, the emperor of whom in 1550 was conquered by the Portuguese, so they say, and he ended his dominion. Well, let's take a couple things. First of all, 1550, the Portuguese did not conquer Monomatapa. They didn't conquer Zimbabwe until way later. Secondly, uh, let's let's address the claim that she made. She said that the Portuguese or whoever thought that the key areas in the 1500s of the Bantu language were in this region, in the Monomatapa regions. I'll first state that by the 1500s, most Europeans actually didn't even know that Monomatapa existed, even the ones that traveled there. The ones that did know lived in the Kingdom of Congo, and they lived by the Swahili regions. And they would have never claimed that the core, maybe one or two of them would have said this as a throwaway line, but in real life, the main thought about the language was that, and this is why they brought people from North Africa, the main thought at the time was that all African languages were connected somehow. The only time that this got dismissed was when the Portuguese came down to the southern part, the torrid zone of West Africa. And when they got there, they just couldn't understand each other whatsoever. And so they realized the language is different. During Vasco da Gama's time, the earliest person to travel to the KZN regions, even though he didn't necessarily land there, when they landed in East Africa, they realized that the languages of Congo, because they had brought a person from the Kingdom of Congo as a interpreter, had some similarities to the languages in East Africa. This is how we know that Bantu people weren't always in East Africa, because we can see them in West Africa. There would still be a migration. Even if you accept that they came from East Africa, how did they get to the west of Africa? There would still be a migration. So, do I agree or disagree with what she's saying? Probably not. If I understand what she's saying, then yes, I disagree with her that the Monomatapa region was the core of the Bantu languages. Even though I know that the Monomatapa language must have influenced these other areas because of its trade, including Arabic languages.
Bantu is an ethnic identifier. The Bantu adopted the name of their current sovereign, which is why they did not have a consistent tribe name that creates a definite timeline. Within the kingdom, they were known according to their occupations. For example, the ideal occupation was the abalombona or balombona, which means men who build, because they built and mined gold, and this group was settled below the Sabi River and at Great Zimbabwe.
Okay, so here I half agree, half disagree. So what she just said was that the names of tribes in Africa sometimes comes from their occupation, and this is absolutely true. For example, if we take the word um, Congo, the word Congo is a word that means to hunt, and that's why the Congolese people were named this. Now, if we read what is written, it is very clear there must be have been a different race from the present that worked the ground for gold in these parts several hundred years ago from the ruins now standing. I think they may have been the same under the name of Abalomba. Now, I do not know where this quote is from. I'm guessing it's the Portuguese saying this again. Again, a lot of these, based on the quote that she gave, a lot of these is something that they claim they heard the natives say as part of their mythology. Now, remember this. This is true also if you look at Greece or ancient Rome, one of those two, encyclopedia, where they built civilizations there. And then when people ask who built the civilization, they go, "Oh, the stones are so big that they must have been built by a cyclops." But we know there was no cyclops. So be careful of enhancing stories beyond necessary terms.
The last known record of what they were called as an ethnic group named for their sovereign is Mananza, which was incorrectly recorded as Manansas, because most Europeans typically had a hard time discerning Bantu sounds or understanding the nuances of the expressions. Mananza was their last king, who was murdered by the insurgent Zulu lieutenant Mzilikazi in 1838. He was murdered in his royal court at a peace conference with Mzilikazi, which is why we don't do peace conferences. After this event, the Bantu were collectively known as Vatonga, which means displaced people or people without a king.
I mean, I don't want to be nitpicky, but a lot of what she's saying is true for very specific Bantu regions. The people in Congo were never called Batonga. So again, I feel like the way she's framing it, it's coming across as a generalization, but these words are very local to very specific areas. And that's, again, yeah, we have to be careful with that, where we take words that appear once in one kingdom and then expand them for a wider purpose. For example, we know that the word Zulu has existed from since the birth of the Congolese language or Bantu language, whatever you want to call it, and the ethnic group only existed way later. These people never called themselves Zulu until then. This is very important to remember, that just because the word is in the language doesn't mean they call themselves that. So I don't want it to come across as a generalization that people will call Batonga. That's a very specific ethnic group.
Prior to this, only the Bantu on the eastern side of Great Zimbabwe were called Batonga, because they were separated by the Shona usurpers from their king Mananza, who was on the western side at Matobo Hills. The Batonga Vanamanza are the earliest Bantu settlers in southern Africa, with archaeological records placing them in southern Africa as early as 200 BCE.
Okay, so this part is going to get a little complicated, so let's bring back the map. So as you can see here, they're from the migration around 3000 BC or 2000 BC, they start to move, and then they end up in South Africa through Southern Africa through two different routes. Now, the ancestors of the Oviharero and the Ovambu and those people living in Angola got to those regions a little later than the people on the eastern side. Well, how do we know this? Well, it is linguistics. But in order to know how quick some of the groups got there, we have to look at culture, pottery, and all this other stuff. I will spare you some of these, but if we look at language, we can tell that the Nguni people are completely separate than some of these other groups, including the Tonga, in that they are not Zimbabwe born in their heritage. So in other words, there is centuries of separation that separates these two regions. The first people to ever arrive in South Africa are the Nguni types, and these Nguni types expanded far deeper in Africa than a lot of these other people traveled, which is why you find Xhosas and all those other types as far as the Western Cape in ancient times. And then you also find the Zulu people, Zulu types, because of course the Zulu are a small tribe. Again, this is a big problem. A lot of people they associate. So, for example, KwaZulu Natal was not owned by the Zulu people. The Zulu types, because most of them were consolidated, would be several tribes along that region that have been there since the 3rd century BC, and due to some pottery finds, probably way earlier than that as well. And then you have the people who were in Zimbabwe, that region of Zimbabwe, the Mapungubwe areas, and all of that. These people are like the Zimbabwe type of Bantu people. We can easily separate them from the Nguni people, as the Nguni people are not as sophisticated technologically as these people. Does this mean that there were no Nguni types that were sophisticated and built? No, we do find things that are better, and I've shown some of them before in the Nguni regions. But most of these are associated with the Zimbabwe types, the sort of Southeast African, let's say non-Nguni type of people. These people are definitely later than the Nguni people in Southern Africa, which is why the Nguni people went so deep in the country. Now, the Nguni people are still part of a bigger group, which a lot of people do not have a name for, which includes Sutu people, and it also includes the other people, Tswana, and all these other people. There are words found that show that these groups, even separated, come together as a collective in different ways, which is why linguistically the African or Bantu languages are broken up into sections of how they migrated deep in, because you find words that definitely didn't exist until maybe the 1400s or the 1200s, and then they suddenly exist, and then they're adopted by specific people around specific areas. One of them, of course, being words like Ghazi, one of them being words like, pick your pick. There's a lot of them. As you can imagine, in the 3rd century BC, it is impossible to give a tribe name to the people living in the southern African regions. And of course, what does southern African mean? Which areas do you start considering southern African? Is Congo part of southern African? Is Angola part of southern Africa? Or just the Swahili regions part of southern Africa? Or are we talking about specifically South Africa? Zulu lineage would give a completely different names, like different names of who came through, which is why they have the word Zulu in their name, which tells you that definitely there are some people who come from a group of people who their ancestors' names are used. For example, Zulu is the name of an ancestor. Then you have person after that until you get to the modern people. And there are breakaways where their tribes are named after chiefs, great chiefs. And this is not just for Zulu, this is for a lot of people.
Their kingdom covered the entire South and Southeast African expanse, where they built the stone structures which were invaded and ruined on the eastern coast by the invading Arab and Portuguese, who later allied with the Shona to take Great Zimbabwe and others.
Okay, so we need to talk about a couple things here, which is one, a lot of the ruins in the Swahili regions were a transitionary period from the old technologies to newer technologies. Did the Portuguese absolutely take over? Yes, but a lot of transition happened. A lot of Swahili type people built their new buildings in the style of the Europeans, not meaning that they copied or anything like that, but because that was just what was happening. Those other civilizations, as you can see with all the pictures I've provided, those other walls were perfectly suited for those regions, and they're no different than modern buildings. But the difference is they started building in the style of the Europeans because the Europeans had taken over to some degree. So I wouldn't necessarily call just because they're ruins, it doesn't mean they were ruined necessarily. Now they were ruins before the Portuguese even got there. There were civilizations in the Swahili region that had died in the 1500s. This is how we know that these people have been building civilizations there for a long time. But more importantly, the type of civilization that the people of Great Zimbabwe and in extension the Batonga and all these other people were building has nothing to do with the Swahili coast. The Swahili coast regions are completely different in building style than the ones that you see in, first of all, you see it in Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. But let's not even go that deep. Let's take Kenya, for example. These are two areas of Kenya. One is representing the coast, and one is representing the interlands or the inlands of South Africa. As you can see, the one with the tiny door is representing the other type of Bantu, which are more consistent with Great Zimbabwe, Botswana, and those regions. In other words, these are not the Swahili people at all. If we just consider Swahili meaning coast, even though not all Swahili kingdoms were necessarily in the coast, but yes, this type is completely different than the type that you. First of all, these are circles, while the Getty ruins are made of stone or squares, square coral. That's another difference. The Swahili tended to build with coral, while the people of Mozambique, the people of Zimbabwe, the people of Tanzania, Kenya, Botswana, Congo, Zambia, they tended to build out of brick. And this is not an exception. And by the way, I just mean away from the coast. They weren't living completely in the coast, but the people that were away from the coast, they tended to build in this style. And you can see from the top view that Great Zimbabwe looks like this place. In fact, you could make the mistake of thinking that that's Great Zimbabwe. It's not. It's a place called Thimlich Ohinga. And then this place here, which represents the Swahili regions, is called the Gedi ruins. These are two completely different styles, and we can see that those styles go back different eras. The ones of Thimlich or Hinga go back, even though they go back about the same era, the same time, they go back to the center, like Congo regions, that style, which tells us when they came and how they came, what direction they took. Whereas the Swahili coast transitioned from that place that I showed you that was in 0 AD. So as soon as Nguni people had entered South Africa, they were the Swahili types had already had a civilization located by Tanzania. The city was so close to the coast that it is underwater today, and as you can see, some of the bricks are over the surface. These walls were not dry walls, and they were not the same small walls. They were clearly carved. They're not the same as the ones that you see in Thimlich Ohinga, Great Zimbabwe, Dombashaba, the Congo, Angola. These are completely different. Dar es Salaam, that's a good one. So, in conclusion, when we say Bantu as a catch all, it's mainly for the languages. and it's mainly for the culture to some way. But these people are not the same in any way, shape, or form, and you can trace their history and lines very different from one another.
This resulted in a tear of their kingdom and the displacement of the Nguni people who were descendants of the Magi at Great Zimbabwe who survived the invasion. Prior to the Shona invasion, which took place between 1330 to 1450, the Batonga were called Waulima, which was the name of their king who resettled a mix of migrating Great Lakes Bantu, Neolithic Kushites at Great Zimbabwe.
Genetically, Cushitic people have made no impact on Zimbabwe whatsoever. I mean, there might be a few Cushites living there because some Cushites live in Kenya, some Cushites live in Tanzania, some Cushites live in those regions. But Zimbabwe is very far away, and they never made it down that far south. Their languages are not represented at all in those regions, and basically the Kushites are outside completely. And now I'm pretty sure that when she says Meje, she means the people from North Africa, the Nilotic people from North Africa. And I have to say that the Meje basically died way before they could ever travel anywhere. The descendants of the people who traveled south, obviously they worship cows and stuff, but they were no longer anywhere near the culture of the Meje. Just like how, the Bantu people, you can't generalize them and be like, oh yeah, the Zulu people went to Somalia, as we see some Bantu peoples in Somalia. You can't take one tribe and expand it to a certain region. It's just not how things work. And I assure you that there's a better way to make a transition from Egypt to the Bantu regions, from the Bantu regions to Southern Africa, without needing to pull people who definitely did not make it down south. Again, no hate. I'm just stating things that are definitely true, which you can easily go Google. It's very easy to go find. The Nilotics are not heavily represented in places like Zimbabwe, and also their civilization. I mean, people in southern Africa to some degree were a little more sophisticated than some of the Nilotics in some ways. But of course, their proximity to Egypt and some of their developments make them more developed in ancient times. So let's not play the game of the people of Zimbabwe came from Nilotics. They did not. Is there a study that claims that some Kushites could have went down to the East Coast region? There is, but a lot of those studies have nothing to do with the Nilotics. They tend to have to do with Ethiopians who are very far south. So people who are already in like the Somalian regions, there is some thought that some of those people went down south by that area by maybe 2000 or 1000 or even 300 BC. That's fine. No one is disputing that. But again, they did not get to Zimbabwe at all. Today, Zimbabwe is mainly Bantu and Khoisan DNA represented. In fact, they did a DNA test on Great Zimbabwe, and they found the only DNA they found was Khoisan and Bantu DNA, which shows that the people of Zimbabwe are mixed with Khoisan, which is something that we all knew. I mean, people of all Bantu people, for the most part, are mixed with Khoisan people because the Khoisan people basically dominated that entire southern African region, which is one of the arguments for why we know there was a transition between the Bantu regions. So the Bantu people didn't always dominate that area. How can we tell? Because the Khoisan DNA, the Khoisan have disappeared in some of these places completely, but the DNA is in the people. And we can find that when we look back, the culture of the Khoisan is represented throughout Southern Africa, from Congo all the way down to South Africa. This is how we know there was most certainly a migration. Is it as late as they say? Probably not. But there was 100% a migration.
These new arrivals were called Zanj. They had escaped the fall of their kingdoms to the Arabs and their allies on the African east coast. This event took place in approximately 1030 AD, which is evident in the change of the culture of Great Zimbabwe.
Okay, we've been through this, but let's go through it again. The Zanj people are the Swahili people. That's the same group as the Raptins, the Swahilians, and all these people. And we know this because it's described by so many. I don't even need to go through them. All the Roman writers write about it from 0 AD all the way till the 1800s. And remember, Great Zimbabwe continued, or not Great Zimbabwe, but civilizations like Great Zimbabwe continued well into the 1800s until they got like abandoned again due to modernization in different ways. Now remember that the people, the Swahili coast, the Zanj, all of these people, they frequently traded with the people of Zimbabwe to the point where even the Europeans could describe them. They were like, "Oh, this is what they look like. That's what they look like." I mean, I could sit here and read all of the things, but I think you guys already know what I'm going to read. It's going to be from Albuquerque. It's going to be from so many of these people who write that gold is taken from these people. I mean, let's just read one then, just for good measure. This is from a report from the Kingdom of Congo, written in the 1500s, and it says Portuguese have a fortress at the mouth of the river of Trauma, trading with those countries in gold, amber, and ivory, all found on that coast, as well as in slaves, and giving in exchange silk stuffs and teffets, which they bring from Gambia or Cambia, where they are worn. The Mohammedans now living in those regions are not natives of the country, but before the Portuguese came into those parts, carried on traffic there, going in small vessels from the coast of Arabia Felix. When the Portuguese became rulers of the country, the Mohammedans whom they found there remained, and at this day are neither heathen nor of the sect of Muhammad. From the shores lying between these two rivers, Magnus and Trauma, stretches out inland the kingdom of Monomotapa, which abounds in gold mines, the metal being carried into all the neighboring provinces to Sofala and to other parts of Africa. It is said that from these regions the gold was brought by sea, which served for Solomon's temple at Jerusalem, a fact by no means improbable, for in these countries of Monomotapa are found several ancient buildings of stone, brick, and wood, and of such wonderful workmanship and architecture as is nowhere seen in the surrounding provinces. The kingdom of Monomotapa is extensive and has a large population of pagan heathens who are black, of middle stature, swift of foot, and in battle fight with great bravery, their weapons being bows and arrows and light darts. There are numerous kings tributaries to Monomotapa who constantly rebel and wage war against it. The emperor maintains large armies, which in the provinces are divided into legions after the manner of the Romans. For being a great ruler, he must be at constant warfare in order to maintain his dominion amongst his warriors. A little beyond, we suddenly come upon the kingdom of Mozambique, situated 14 degrees and a half forth, which takes its name from three islands laying at the mouth of the river Magan Chate, where is a safe and large port capable of accommodating ships of every size. The kingdom is a small, but abounds in every kind of food, and is touched at by all the vessels coming from Portugal and India to the country. In one of these islands called Mozambique, which is their principal and gives name to all the rest, as also to the whole kingdom, and to the above mentioned port stands a fortress garrisoned by the Portuguese, from which are provisions and on which depend all the other fortresses of the on the coast. The fleet which sail from Portugal to India is delayed in passage. Winter at Mozambique, and those which come to Europe and India from India necessarily touch at Mozambique for provisions. This island, when the Portuguese discovered India, was the first from which they drew any knowledge of the Indian language, and where they found the pilots who directed their course. The people of this kingdom are heathen, black, naked, and very rough, but excel in archery and in excellent fishermen. Following the coastline, we come upon another island called Kilwa, not of a great size, but singularly excellent in position, for the climate is temperate. It has trees, always green, and produces every kind of food. It lies in the mouth of the river Quavo, which, issuing from the same lake as the Nile, flows for 70 miles towards the sea, where it becomes a wide stream, blah, blah, blah. So you can see that even back in the day, first of all, he was way more impressed by Great Zimbabwe, Dombashaba, and those regions. And looking at Dombashaba or any of these regions, why wouldn't he be impressed? Some of these places, they have so many bricks, it's unbelievable. But when he gets to the coast, he's less impressed. He's still impressed, but he's less impressed. And clearly, the designs in Zimbabwe did not come from the Swahili people at all. Again, I want to state that never did they come from the Swahili. And as early as you can see, the Portuguese make a big difference between the two regions.
which signaled a new population who shared their own practices and also absorbed the older population's practices. So we are certain this wasn't an invasion but a resettlement.
No, it was not an invasion and it was not a resettlement. And the people of Great Zimbabwe, the people of the Swahili coast, always traded with each other. The people of the Swahili tended to go overseas and meet with people overseas, as you can see there, where he said, um, the what was it? Kilwa is or Mozambique is one of the first islands that they got to and met Indians. Now remember, there was another tribe there. I forgot the name of it now, where Vasco da Gama went to India from. He got the information from the local chief there of how to get to India, and he had a person with him who went with him to Goa.
This group used the C prefix, which is a dominant prefix among the Nguni people. The C prefix is a prefix assigned to the generals or defense forces who form the Medjay or bull or cowhorn branch of the Bantu kingdom. The cowhorn formation comes from these forces and was made famous by the Zulus.
So this bull attack, which has the chest of the cattle being the strongest part, and then the horns circulate and murder. This is consistent the world around. Like any war area will have this type of thing. Now there are some people who say that these tactics came from East Africa. I do not believe that. There are some people who believe that they were adopted from East Africa, but we don't really see that much use of this type of battle. Now, even in the Zulu kingdom, I'll be honest, the Europeans overplayed this type of battle strategy. The Zulus had a bunch of battle strategies. They also had hit and run guerrilla tactics. They also had silent poses. They also would not show up to battlegrounds, and then the people would think, oh, there's no one, and then when they were retreating, they would be somewhere. This obviously did happen. This was one of their strategies in a face-to-face war, but the Zulus were very tricky in the way that they went about war, and this would only represent only one of their strategies. They had many strategies, which was probably one of the reasons why they were so dangerous. This one was adopted by foreigners because, of course, it's one of the easiest to see. But of course, if we read the one of a report from the Kingdom of Congo, you saw there that Great Zimbabwe, they were set up like Roman legions, as he stated. And this is an eyewitness to some degree. Well, the person writing is writing from an eyewitness point of view, and this Roman style of battle with these people clearly was there prior to any Swahili influence or anything like that, as you can see, because they were strong. These people in the Great Zimbabwe regions, Monomatapa, which is bigger than Great Zimbabwe. I just keep saying Great Zimbabwe because that's the heart of it. They defeated Swahili type people. They defeated the Portuguese. They defeated Arabs. They were You couldn't invade them because they had tactics such as these. And so to say that these tactics come from outside, no, they don't.
At Great Zimbabwe, the Magi were positioned as the second and last line of defense that supported the Mongas, who were stationed along the Zambezi at Sena and Tete. Once Great Zimbabwe had fallen to the Shona of Changambire and his Arab and Portuguese allies.
Before she goes on to talk about that, I actually want to bring up something very, very important about the difference between Zulu military and other Bantus, especially those in Zimbabwe. So let's read again this area, but let's read the part about war. The kingdom of Monomotapa is extensive and has a large population of pagan heathens who are black, of middle stature, swift of foot, and in battle fight with great bravery. Their weapons, very important, Zulus tended to use spears, their weapons being bows and arrows and light darts. There are numerous kings tributary to Monomatapa who constantly rebel and wage war against it. The emperor maintains large armies, which in the province are divided into legions. Now, here's another part that's very different. After the manner of the Romans, for being a great ruler, he must be at constant war in order to maintain his dominion. Amongst his warriors, this again, very important, the next part, those most renowned for bravery are the female legions, greatly valued by the emperor, being signs of his military. Okay, so, or being the finest of his military. I don't know what that word is supposed to be. Uh, let's look at it in a specific way. Okay, so Zulus didn't use females for war. This guy is saying these are considered the bravest of them all. And if we read further, we'll find out that they used to burn their breasts, which is a practice still done in Africa, in order to be able to fire their arrows. So these people are way more, you know, probably useful than a lot of the Zulu kingdom people were. And of course, they conquered a great region. It's even thought that as far as Thimlich Rohingya in Kenya, the influence of these people were felt there, and also it was felt in Congo. And that's another thing. The people of Angola and all of those people, they all use females in battle. Even in East Africa, the people of Somalia, the people of Ethiopia, they also used females in battle. And the Swahili coast was known to also use females in battle. The Nguni, very different story. Now, of course, the Nguni have a different relationship with females than any other people around the world, as in the Ngunis, there were people who are top leaders of the kingdom who are female. Instead of being in battle, which we do see some battles where some females engage, but in battle, they're not very used. But in terms of leadership roles, which would be considered a taboo or a no-no in other cultures, they have some of the biggest say-sos in history within that kingdom. So we're talking about two completely different things here.
The Nguni moved south in different phases, and the old Batonga kingdom was finally split and fractured.
Again, I can easily show that the Xhosa type people have been in the region of South Africa for some of the longest time in history. And these people, I mean, you could tell how long they've been there. They speak like with a click, meaning that they are truly Southern in the sense that they have adopted the Khoisan languages that are in the South. But let's not even go into that depth. If we look at the first Portuguese or the first Arabs or whoever you want to choose who landed in those regions, they clearly state, let's take the first Portuguese, they clearly state that the first people they ran into were Khoisan people, right, living in the coast areas, so in the Cape, right, of South Africa, Cape of Good Hope. And as soon as he moves, he sees a darker type of people. These would be the Nguni types, and then he travels further, which by the way he states that, that's the first place where they also speak a very similar, with similar words, but they couldn't understand all the words of those people like they could with the ones in East Africa. And then after that they see Khoisan people again. Now remember, the Zulu people did chase out some Khoisan people. There were a lot of Khoisan tribes still living in the Natal regions in Africa, right, in the South African regions, because the Bantu tribes, the Nguni tribes there, were not as collected as they became later. And we even see cave art depicting people from Khoisan heritage running away from Bantu people, and they depict Bantu people with giant shields in their cave art, and most of them moved away from the KwaZulu Natal regions. This is very different story than the one that is being painted of the Batonga and all of that. I'm gonna guess that she's probably of Batonga heritage, which, by the way, anyone who knows anything about Mozambique and Zambia and Zimbabwe and all the people in those regions have a great history. They do not need a connection to Egypt in any way. In fact, I think that diminishes their power. I mean, look what this European said about this kingdom. He was so impressed by the architecture that he believed a myth that said that these people could have been responsible for a building in Israel. He said it's not improbable because clearly these people are capable of doing that. We're talking about a very sophisticated civilization here.
Tonga speak the Proto-Bantu language, which is a linguistic continuity of Majwi Nejali, which is the ancient Egyptian language. Majwi Nejali is an expression that is still used in Plateau Tonga. Majwi means voice or speech, and Nejali invokes a nostalgic time of bliss.
So let me take the time to explain a couple things here. One, there are definitely respected linguistics who believe that there is a connection between Bantu languages and other African languages, including ancient Egyptian in the form of Afroasiatic. But I will caution that linguistically, again, a lot of these will be speculative. Now, I hear what you're saying about this one of Majwi or Medu Nature or any of these things. So Amazwi and Medi, you could see there that there is a similarity between the word words and blah 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 blah. I do not dispute this at all, but I have to say you have to be careful of lookership, which is to look at words that look the same and say, see, there is a similarity, therefore these words come from the same place. But, but let's take, for example, something that she was talking about earlier about prefixes, and I mentioned this. So if you look there, right, at the word amazwi, which means words. The a part, the a in the beginning, that's a prefix. The ma part, that's an infix. The last part, zwi, that's a suffix. All of these show that this is not necessarily one word. As you can see, if we go all the way down, if you go from translation of Izwi, noun Izwi, the word Izwi is clearly a the sort of, it's called a core word in here. And then of course you go to a and ma, which are prefixes and infixes, and then you have the suffix of Izwi, and you can see this word being used in different ways again. This is just how the language works. Prefixes, suffixes, infixes, they're not foreign. They're very domestic to Africa. And if you look at all of these words here, you can break them down. Umbala, right? Tone. The u part that represents the in a way. Uh, mba is different. La is different. And then they come together to form the word mbala, which means tone. But if you break it down, you can get a completely different word, different words, and how you get there. Even the word lala, which means sleep in most Bantu languages, a lot of the time people have broken down to mean here, here. So la meaning sleep and la meaning here, sleep here. As a demonstration, I will give you this long sort of using L's and A's and I's. And by the way, this could get way longer and still mean something. So you can see that the translation is listen, the village is sleeping. So it says la le la la, ila li la la la. This sentence is incomplete, but it will demonstrate easily for you that these are all prefixes and infixes. And by changing a simple part of it, you will change the entire meaning of this entire region.
The speakers of Plateau Tonga are known as Vanamonze Vana Vajundu. You probably noticed the use of the va sound, which is a good place to start understanding the correct meaning of Bantu. Plateau Tonga is a spiritual language that heavily relies on synonyms, which allows for a diverse expression and shades of meaning. The old expressions lack linking and conjugations. The language is built on morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in a language. In the Proto-Bantu language, Plateau Tonga, the sounds va, n, and tu all have standalone meanings.
Okay, so what she's explaining right now is what I was talking about. Free morphemes are for, of course, like cat, run, and happy, which when put with the bound morphemes, you get running or walked or unhappy, things like that. So, yes, there is these morphemes in the Zulu language. The difference is, or the Bantu languages, the difference is in English, it's rare. It occurs for specific reasons, whereas in Bantu languages, the entire language works like this. Every single word can be attached to another prefix or suffix to form a sentence, and not just can, it is always attached to another uh, prefix or suffix or infix, which most languages don't tend to use infixes, except Afro-Asiatic and Bantu languages.
Va denotes a blessing, an invocation that brings forth the ideal manifestation of the Va'ila, or those who ascended to the heavens, who are known among the Vanavajundu as Vasango, the guardian spirits. So strictly speaking, Va, the ideal manifestation of those who flew to the heavens; Sa, my familiars or my people; Ngu, my or ours. This is written in the subject-object-verb formation, but when rearranged to the standard English subject-verb-object form, it reads, the ideal manifestation of those who flew to the heavens, who are our familiars or our people.
So I kind of don't know what she's talking about, but I want to go back to something she said earlier, which was about the word Bantu, right? This word can be broken down to Bantu. Now, read like this, anybody can tell that the word here means the, ba meaning people of, ndu, the people of ndu, Bantu. in the same way that you can say Abantu, Bantu. So in other words, Abantu Bantu, the people of Ntu. The ba part is important. Abantu Bantu, the people of Ntu. But this word alone will give you that, which is why it's believed that this is a ancestral word rather than a word that has to do with location or has to do with work or anything like that. You can see this in how local people would call the Zulu people, which would be Amazulu, which would be, if you change the M to a B, you can see exactly what is happening. And this is true for many, many tribes.
So Bantu means the ideal manifestation of those who flew to the heavens, who are our familiars.
Where did that come from?
If you hadn't noticed yet, the true Bantu are ancient Egyptian. So how did we get here? A glaring indicator is that the Proto-Bantu language is the language of ancient Egypt, which was brought into southern Africa by the pharaoh, who abandoned ancient Egypt after the Persian invasion for the south and then migrated into southern Africa, where their presence is first detected in approximately 200 BCE. So how come there aren't any hieroglyphs or pyramids in southern Africa?
Well, probably a more important question before we go into hieroglyphs is, why are the languages so vastly different, and why are they so similar to those of West Africa if they came from Egypt? I'm not saying there were no Bantu people in Egypt. There probably were. In fact, we have DNA of Ramses whose DNA goes down with the Bantu people. But to say that the people of the Bantu came from Egypt is a bit of a stretch, especially if you can see that the pottery of Bantu people has got nothing to do with Egypt. It's more, it goes down more with Nilo-Saharans, as you can see with the red topped pottery or the black top pottery. Um, the language of the Bantu has got nothing to do with the ancient Egyptian language in a sort of ancient times, maybe prehistoric, there's a connection, but even that is speculation. And I speculate there too because I believe that there is a connection. There is also the fact that a lot of the culture is very similar between Egypt and the Bantu areas. But again, I blame this on a joined prehistory somewhere in Chad rather than they migrated from Egypt all the way down to the Zimbabwe regions. That is, I mean, at this point, that is close to impossible, especially if you consider, the migration that she herself explained, which came from West Africa all the way to, like, why would the Egyptians travel to West Africa and then travel to Southern Africa? And of course, why is there the DNA of most of the people located in Egypt who are black? Why does it link up more with Nilotic people than it does with Bantu people? And also, those areas are so hot that the people in those regions tend to be very black, not the same color as those of the Bantu. Again, I'm not saying there is no transition between Egyptians, as the Egyptians did at one point circumnavigate Africa, but this circumnavigation was due to the fact that they had no idea what was all the way down south, as far south as South Africa. And that was somewhere in like 800 AD, 800 BC, excuse me. There also is zero tales of um, pharaohs moving from Egypt to southern Africa at all. Now, keep in mind, I do have videos that show that ancient Egyptians did go as far as East Africa or the Horn of Africa. So I'm not alleging that the ancient Egyptians did not have any influence on Bantu people, because, like I said, there are moments in history which have written down times which you can see. And of course, there are some words in ancient Egyptian that seem to be related to the Bantu language words, but that's not good enough. That's why it's also important to show that the grammar has a lot of similarities. With this one that she points out, the use of morphemes, that's how the ancient Egyptian language works. A very strange coincidence or a similarity.
Africa. Well, most of it was destroyed in the numerous raids and invasions, and there was no need for pyramids in southern Africa because of the expression Vana Jundu. Jundu means great peak or mount. Southern Africa, especially the Zimbabwe area where they settled, is full of great peaks or mounts, and this is where they believed they could summon the gods to take the souls of the dead to the heavens, and even Cecil Rhodes believed it, which is why he is buried at Matobo Hills. I hope you found this useful. I will expand on this history as we go. Please like and subscribe.
Okay, I'll be honest, you need more evidence than they did not leave hieroglyphics there because there was a lot of destruction. And also, I think it's a very colonial thought, the idea that the people native to Southern Africa could not have built what they built. But I'm wrong. I'm wrong. Let's just anybody who gets offended by what I'm saying, just take it this way. I'm incorrect and what she's saying is correct, and let's just leave it there because I'm not going to agree with a lot of what she has to say. Like I said, I respect her opinion. I think it's a very solid one in some ways, but I think it's a very flimsy one in others. And I assure you that the ancient Egyptians and the structures that she showed, the ancient Egyptian pyramids and the structures she showed, have no similarities whatsoever, as the quote unquote mountain like structures at Dombashaba were actually livable structures, whereas the peaks, or whatever you want to call them, in ancient Egypt were burial zones. Like no one lived there. They have no similarities whatsoever in culture, in understanding, in reality. They have nothing to do with each other. So, yeah, thank you. By the way, there's a new pharaoh, a new prince that was discovered in ancient Egypt just this month. So, let's prepare a video for that. The video will first include that I believe that the ancient Egyptian historians have found several other mummies, but they bring them out one by one in order to continually have stories as the ages go on. So you go, oh, we found something new. Oh, we found every year they find something new, and I think it's because they are very business minded and they take them out one at a time. So thank you very much for watching this video. Like, share, subscribe. Please don't get angry. I'm just giving my opinion.